Doctor Who Doctor by Doctor. Second Doctor Era Overview plus Top 10 Stories. The era of the Second Doctor, as played by the magnificent Patrick Troughton, ran for 3 seasons, seasons 4, 5 and 6, from 1966 to 1969, ultimately appearing in no less than 119 episodes across a total of 21 stories. The Second Doctor was initially accompanied by his companions Ben and Polly, a 60s sailor and secretary played by Michael Craze and Anneke Wills respectively, who had joined the First Doctor on his travels in the last few stories of his era. They left toward the end of season 4 and were replaced by a single female companion, Victoria Waterfield, a shy and gentle young girl from the Victorian era, played by Deborah Watling. Victoria left the series toward the end of Series 5 and was replaced by sexy little Zoe Heriot, a whip-smart astrophysicist and computer genius from the future, played by Wendy Padbury, who remained with the Doctor until the end of his era. Of course, no mention of the Second Doctor's companions is complete without Jamie McCrimmon, a Scottish Highlander played by future Emmerdale Farm actor Fraser Hines. Jamie joins the Doctor in only his second story, appropriately enough titled The Highlanders, and remains with him all the way through his era, becoming one of the most long-running and popular companions ever seen in the series. Innes Lloyd, who had taken over as producer of the series midway through season 3 from John Wiles, whose brief but disastrous tenure had sent ratings reaching for the floor, produced season 4, being joined by associate producer Peter Bryant toward the end of the season, who also replaced Jerry Davis as script editor. The 5th season saw production duties swapping like mad, with Peter Bryant, Lloyd, Victor Pemberton and Derek Sherwin serving as producers and script editors, sometimes interchangeably. In season 6 this chopping and changing of duties between members of the production also extended to newcomer Terrance Dicks, who would be the full-time solo script editor of the series throughout the Third Doctor's era. If the character of the Second Doctor, a whimsical, funny little man that few people initially take seriously but with a fierce moral core and intellect, seemed very different to the outwardly stern and more naturally authoritative First Doctor, so too was his era. Following the Highlanders, the format of the pure historical story which had been so much a part of the First Doctor's tenure, was completely dropped as the series focused ever more heavily on action-adventure and monsters galore, with a higher horror content than had previously been seen in the series. The era of the Second Doctor saw the Cybermen, who had been introduced in the final story of the First Doctor's era, the 10th planet, essentially replaced the Daleks as the Doctor's greatest and most persistent monstrous foes, and introduced some of its most iconic creations, including the Great Intelligence and the Yeti, the Ice Warriors unit and its iconic leader, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, played by the irreplaceable Nicholas Courtney, who would go on to be a regular fixture of the Third Doctor's era, and finally the biggest development of all, with the explanation of the Doctor's origins and the arrival of the Time Lords in this Doctor's final story, The War Games. The arrival of the Second Doctor not only proved that the series could survive the loss of its leading man but even benefit, as the dwindling ratings for the last season of the Hartnell era were revived by the new Doctor and the exciting stories with which he was provided. Sadly, the era of the Second Doctor is also the most badly affected by the notorious archive purge which has cost us so many Doctor Who stories from the 1960s, with season 4 having not so much as one complete story remaining. The lack of so many episodes also has a big impact on my own personal Top 10 Second Doctor Stories. 10. The Moon Base. The Cybermen are essentially reintroduced with a major redesign and rethink in this spooky base under siege story, a format that would be used on many occasions in the Troughton era. 2 episodes of the story are missing but what remains is atmospheric and engaging enough to make my top 10. 9. The Abominable Snowmen. This 6-part story has just one remaining episode, Part 2, which is strong enough to make me place this at number 9, as is the fact that this is the first story to feature the Great Intelligence and the Yeti, and that its sequel, The Web of Fear, from the same writers, is so very good indeed. Please find more. 8. The Evil of the Daleks. A 7-part epic of which only part 2 remains, but it's one hell of a good episode, with great writing, acting and production values, and the mouth positively waters at the thought of ever getting to see the whole thing. This story would probably end up much higher on this list if it did all exist, as is the case with many Troughton stories, but even just part 2 gets it to number 8 in my book. 7. The Wheel in Space. This 6-part story manages to have 2 episodes left to watch, parts 3 and 6, which manages to get it one spot over Evil, and it looks like another fun and atmospheric Cyberman story that is also the intro for one of my favorite companions, sexy little Zoe. Yeah baby. 6. The Faceless Ones. Another 6-parter with 2 episodes remaining, parts 1 and 3. And what is left is extremely encouraging indeed, with a fascinating plot, great guest characters and actors, and again high production values. I want more. 5. The Crotons. This might seem a bit high, but that's mainly because this is the first story on this list that's actually complete. This season 6 story isn't the greatest in the world, even in spite of being the debut for Future Who writing legend Robert Holmes, but it's an entertaining and occasionally even atmospheric romp with the Second Doctor, Jamie and sexy little Zoe team on fun form. 4. The Ice Warriors. 2 episodes of this 6-parter are missing, but the majority remains and is enough to get this story to 4th place on my list. This is a great introduction for these iconic monsters and has some really good direction and atmosphere, particularly in the ice-laden exterior sequences. Very enjoyable. 3. The War Games. This may surprise some of you, as I once held this as my favorite, but it has slipped a tad of late. That being said, it's still a ripper of an epic 10-part story, every single episode of which exists, introducing the Time Lords and giving the Second Doctor, his companions, his era and the 1960s one hell of a send-off. 2. The Web of Fear. Some fans professed disappointment over this masterpiece, a 6-part story which was mostly, bar episode 3, returned to us miraculously in 2013, preferring to be cool and iconoclastic and insist that the rather dreary Enemy of the World was better, but fuck that nonsense I say. Episode 1, which existed before The Find, was always mouth-wateringly good, and the rest of the story more than lived up to that promise in my opinion, introducing dear old Alistair for the first time in one hell of a dramatic and creepy story. Awesome. 1. The Invasion. Just pipping the Web of Fear to the top spot. The Invasion is a blood brother to that story, with the return of Alistair now promoted to Brigadier and the formation of UNIT, and the final appearance of the Cyberman, the Second Doctor's greatest nemesis, in his era. With great action, stunning direction and a killer villain who makes Bond villains look like unambitious pussies in the form of Kevin Stoney's Tobias Vaughan, plus sexy little Zoe, The Invasion is an undiluted, indisputable masterpiece. The era of the Second Doctor doesn't quite make it into my all-time top 3, and the destruction of so much of it also sucks serious ass, and yet I rate it very highly even in spite of that, with a fantastic Doctor, some wonderful companions, particularly Jamie and sexy little Zoe, and some great stories with tons of atmosphere. There is no way the Second Doctor era deserves anything less than a high A-.